The air in the committee room is taut, the kind of silence that hums before thunder. Cameras catch every blink, every breath. At the center of the horseshoe table, Ted Lieu leans into his microphone, voice smooth but edged with that courtroom precision that says, "I'm about to prove a point." His question lands like a pebble in still water, polite, pointed, and layered with doubt. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett sits motionless, fingertips resting lightly on a notepad, her eyes locked and steady. There's no flinch, no retreat, only the faintest half-smile, the kind that hides a storm about to break. The chatter behind her stalls, even the rustle of papers fades. You can almost hear the collective intake of breath from everyone watching. The aides in the back row, the journalists already halfway through their tweets, the millions waiting online for another reason to believe in someone who looks like them. Liu's cadence tightens. "With all due respect, perhaps you could remind this committee of your professional background?" The words drip with civility but carry the unmistakable subtext of dismissal. A small murmur passes through the room, equal parts discomfort and curiosity. Is this the moment he corners her? Crockett draws in a slow breath.
Her pen stops tapping.
Her gaze doesn't waver, it sharpens. For a heartbeat, she lets silence answer first, a silence heavy enough to rearrange attention. Even those who had tuned out feel pulled back toward her, as if they know instinctively that something significant is about to happen. Every lens focuses closer. Somewhere, a phone camera light flicks on. The sound of a single cough echoes like a drumbeat. Lieu folds his hands, satisfied that the pause means hesitation. He prepares to move on, unaware that the pause isn't retreat, it's loading ammunition. Then, lifting her chin only slightly, Crockett parts her lips to speak. Her voice, measured, calm, disarmingly confident, slices through the tension. Whatever she's about to say will not just answer a question, it will change the atmosphere entirely. Even the cameras seem to lean closer. But as the words left his mouth, Jasmine's answer rewrote the tempo of the entire hearing. To understand why that question mattered, you have to rewind the reel a few frames. On one side of the table sat Ted Lieu, veteran lawmaker, known for razor-sharp interrogations and a presence that fills a room before he even speaks. His resume stretches like a roll call of committees and causes, each bullet point burnished by years of procedural combat. When he asks a question, it carries the weight of seniority, the polish of experience, and the expectation that whoever sits opposite will tread carefully. On the other side sat Jasmine Crockett, newer to the national stage, but anything except unseasoned. Her rise hadn't been paved with endorsements or effortless access, it was built in long nights preparing briefs, defending the overlooked, earning credibility the hard way. Yet the moment she walked into Congress, the familiar pattern began, the sideways glances, the whispered "Who is she?" that greets every woman who refuses to wait her turn. For people like her, credentials aren't just documents, they're armor. The meeting itself wasn't supposed to generate headlines. It was a hearing buried in a week of endless headlines, another exchange about accountability that would normally drift quietly into the transcript. But that's the thing about hierarchy, it has a way of underestimating disruption. When Lieu leaned forward, his polished confidence hid something deeper, a generational reflex that measures worth by tenure, by the number of terms survived rather than the principle lived. For younger lawmakers, especially those carrying the dual burden of representation and expectation, every challenge can look like a test they never consented to take. Crockett knew this. She had seen it in courtrooms, on panels, in spaces where power disguised itself as mentorship. So when the question came, it wasn't just about her resume. It was about permission, the right to stand unflinching in a space not built for her comfort. Narration briefly widens, the tone part documentarian, part heartbeat. This is the ancient rhythm of every power structure meeting its mirror. Generational certitude versus emerging clarity. The voice that says, "I've done this longer," against the one that asks, "But have you done it better?" America has watched this story play out countless times, repainted in every decade's colors. And yet, watching it unfold again feels impossible to look away from, because each retelling decides who gets to belong. The spectators in the room sensed it too. Some leaned forward, lips pursed, not quite sure whether to feel anticipation or discomfort. Others began already crafting interpretations in their heads, the headlines, the memes, the geists of tomorrow's feed. They knew that respect and bias often share the same vocabulary, that the phrase "just a question" can carry 1,000 shadows. Back at the microphone, Liu's tone softened, the way a pilot steadies a plane before banking. He expected deference, perhaps a formal rundown of degrees and positions. Something safe, something that would keep the tempo predictable. He didn't yet see the gathering momentum behind those composed eyes, the patience of someone who has been underestimated too many times to count. In that moment, the setting, a wood-paneled hall drenched in fluorescent light, stood for more than another committee meeting. It transformed into a stage where the old rhythm of vetting and proving would meet a new melody of presence and purpose. Crockett wasn't there to audition, she was there to correct the script. Yet, what he believed would expose her inexperience would soon reveal his own miscalculation. Before the exchange that would ignite headlines, Ted Lieu carried the sort of reputation Washington both respects and fears: a master of phrasing, a strategist fluent in the pulse of public theater. He was the congressional equivalent of the chess player who never raises his voice yet still controls the room's tension. Every move deliberate, every silence purposeful. Years in uniform, years in chambers, years learning that discipline in tone can achieve more than volume in outrage. Colleagues often described him as unfailingly prepared. He read every document, annotated margins until the ink thickened. When others arrived with talking points, he came with traps disguised as questions. It wasn't cruelty, it was craft. In a city that rewards vigilance, Lieu built his standing by leaving nothing uncalculated. Even his walk down those marbled corridors said it: confidence not performed but worn, like a custom-fitted suit. That morning, camera crews caught a glimpse of his arrival, shoes echoing sharply against the tile, a reflection of order beneath chaos. Staffers moved aside with the fluent choreography of routine. To onlookers, his presence promised precision. When Ted Lieu entered a hearing, the expectation was simple: someone would end up on the defensive, and it wouldn't be him. He was, after all, a product of both discipline and defiance. Discipline learned in service, defiance born from navigating the contradictions of politics, how to be both a loyal colleague and an unflinching critic. Over time, that balance hardened into method: never rush to insult, never surrender control. The room had to feel that calm was his property, distributed on his terms. But control is a dangerous comfort. It can convince even the most principled actor that power is proof of accuracy. For Lieu, confidence had become instinct, a second language that translated every interruption into confirmation of his status. When he questioned witnesses, it wasn't intimidation, it was verification. Every syllable carried the weight of precedent, a reminder that he had earned his place through endurance. Still, endurance can narrow vision. He didn't dislike new voices, he simply trusted the hierarchy that had once tested him. To him, questioning credentials wasn't personal, it was procedural, a gateway ritual. If others had endured it, why not Crockett? In that logic lay the seed of irony: his fairness looked to outsiders like doubt, his restraint like condescension. And that irony, though invisible to him, would soon define the encounter. In preparation for that hearing, his team reviewed pages of testimony, predicted areas of weakness, mapped moments where a measured question could expose inconsistency. The legal instinct had served him for decades: dismantle the argument, not the person. Yet every argument contains a person at its heart, and somewhere in that familiar dance between scrutiny and decorum, he missed how tone can travel further than content. The committee room itself became an amplifier. Bright lights exaggerated every micro-gesture, every raised brow. The smell of coffee and copier paper mixed with faint electricity, the buzz of anticipation that follows a high-profile session. Lieu took his seat deliberately, checking his microphone, adjusting papers with the precision of a pilot completing a pre-flight checklist. When he greeted fellow members, it was polite, perfunctory. He was already composing openings in his head. Inside, there was no malice. There was simply certainty. Certainty that the order of questions could steer outcomes. Certainty that rigor ensured respect. Certainty that his brand of diligence symbolized fairness itself. He had earned this posture through years of being the relentless questioner who never relied on theatrics. To him, suspicion was due diligence, and skepticism, an act of responsibility. But the nature of confidence is that it hears every silence as agreement. It interprets calm faces as concession. And on that day, across those gleaming microphones, he mistook Crockett's composure for retreat. He thought the stillness meant she had nothing prepared. He didn't yet realize it was the opposite. The irony deepened when he introduced his line of questioning. Observers noted the careful rhythm, courteous acknowledgement of her role, an almost avuncular nod toward unity, then the narrow pivot: and what specific experiences qualify you for this matter? It was less a challenge than a filter, but filters, by design, decide who passes. Somewhere between syllables, his confidence shifted from precision to presumption. Watching from the gallery, you could feel the imbalance. The tone that once enforced respect now hovered on the edge of dismissal. Liu's eyes remained steady as he waited for her answer, unaware that the same confidence that had shielded him for years was now about to make him vulnerable, not to humiliation, but to revelation. Because across the table sat someone who had learned to weaponize composure, to turn underestimation into spotlight. And then, across the table, sat the one person who would not flinch. Long before the flash of cameras and the marble echo of congressional hearings, Jasmine Crockett's world was built on smaller rooms where stakes still felt enormous. Courtrooms that smelled of paper and dust and people's futures. The first thing you'd notice wasn't grandeur. It was motion, her hands skimming pages of affidavits at midnight, yellow highlighter smearing slightly where fatigue met persistence. She didn't have the luxury of cinematic lighting back then, just a desk lamp and the hum of conviction. The law had never been her inheritance, it was her rebellion. Raised to believe in fairness but forced to see its uneven distribution, she treated justice not as a profession but as a promise she was personally trying to keep. Every client, every community meeting, every late-night phone call reinforced the same lesson: power listens only when persistence refuses silence. In those early years, the grind wasn't glamorous. She drove long miles between district courthouses, her car doubling as office and sanctuary. Sticky notes lined the dashboard, coffee cups rolled on the floor. Sometimes dawn crept up on her before sleep did. The radio stayed tuned to talk shows dissecting policies she hoped one day to influence firsthand. When exhaustion perched on her shoulder whispering "what's the point," she glanced at the folders stacked on the passenger seat. Names, stories, signatures waited by the hope that someone somewhere would still fight for them. Inside the courtroom, she carved credibility the old-fashioned way. No surname advantage, no established gatekeeper reserving her seat. The task was deceptively simple: earn respect, one argument at a time. Judges tested her patience, opposing counsel tested her tolerance. Each time she stood behind a wooden podium, someone inevitably underestimated her. Sometimes because she was young, sometimes because she was a woman, often because she was both. But endurance became her trademark. And outside those rooms, when the suits and briefcases disappeared, she transformed into advocate and organizer, standing on makeshift stages with a mic that occasionally screeched with feedback. The crowds were smaller, but the stakes felt just as high: parents demanding equity in schools, neighbors fighting zoning laws that sliced through their history, young people learning how to translate frustration into participation. She collected their stories the way historians collect artifacts, careful not to break the fragile hope at the center of each one. Her activism wasn't about slogans. It was about faces: the single mother balancing two jobs who still showed up at City Hall, the teenager who thought politics was just noise until Jasmine made it sound like belonging. Each success was rented, never owned. She had to renew it daily through performance and consistency. That combination, audacity and repetition, became her quiet addiction. Yet even victories carried backlash. The louder she advocated, the louder came the criticism, online, in newsprint, in whispered commentary about whether she was ready for leadership. But ready is a myth reserved for those already allowed through the door. Jasmine confronted the door directly until it learned to open. In those moments of pushback, she refined what would later disarm an entire congressional room: composure as counterargument. You could trace her preparation not just to education but to temperament. Law taught her how to structure logic. Life taught her how to read tone. She became fluent in both, appealing to juries with reason while sensing the undercurrent of bias that logic alone couldn't dissolve. She studied not just statute books but human behavior: when to lower her voice, when to let pause do the heavy lifting. Those small skills, invisible to most, built her iron calm. When opportunity finally called in the form of public office, she walked through that door with no illusions. The same underestimation followed her into every chamber. Reporters mispronounced her name, insiders mistook confidence for arrogance. Still, she took her seat, pen poised, posture steady. She had been underestimated for so long that it had become her native air. Instead of resisting it, she transmuted it into focus. Let them wonder, she'd answer through performance. Her staff often joked that her desk looked like a hurricane made of statutes and sticky notes. But there was order in the chaos: case law at one end, community letters at the other. Each note reminded her why she was still fighting from inside rather than shouting from outside. The job, she knew, wasn't to fit into the tradition of politics but to stretch it toward inclusion. That's what kept her calm when others mistook calm for passivity. By the time cameras started following her into hearings, her nerves were long past raw. They'd been annealed into strength. She had withstood late payments, online vitriol, courtroom ambushes, and endless mentorship that sounded suspiciously like containment. None of that hardened her, it clarified her. Every obstacle had shaved away distraction until only purpose remained. So when that morning's hearing placed her across from a congressman known for intellectual rigor and probing cross-examinations, she recognized the terrain instantly. It was the same test rewritten in fancier fonts, someone assuming the right to measure her worth. She sat tall, hands resting lightly, remembering every courthouse where she'd been told she was too loud, every boardroom where she'd been told to wait her turn. Those memories didn't erupt into visible anger. They settled quietly behind her composure, storing voltage for the next few seconds that would define her narrative. So when that question landed, the one meant to test her mettle, it found steel instead. The moment they returned to the present, the hearing felt like a stage wired for tension. The air vibrated not from sound, but from the collective restraint of everyone watching. Ted Lieu straightened in his chair, tapping one finger on a stack of papers, an almost imperceptible metronome setting the rhythm. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett sat absolutely still. Stillness, after all, was her signature move. Lieu began again, words clipped, each question precisely measured. "We appreciate your enthusiasm, Representative, but could you clarify the basis of your..." He paused, not to listen, but to direct where the conversation would go next. "Authority works best when it sounds like courtesy." Crockett nodded once, leaving a beat of silence between them that stretched just slightly beyond comfort. "Certainly," she said evenly, her voice unhurried, the kind that forces others to adjust their own pacing just to catch up. She didn't answer yet. Instead, she rephrased his question aloud, verifying it, dissecting it, making the act of listening deliberate. The sound of her voice against the low hum of air conditioning was electric, polite thunder. A gavel tap punctured the quiet, a reminder from the chair for decorum, but decorum had already shifted. Lieu leaned forward again, his confidence sharpened into insistence. "Representative Crockett, I'm simply asking whether your experience extends to these specific legal matters." There it was again, the coded suggestion of limitation. Her eyes lifted from her notes, unblinking.
"Specific," she echoed.
Her tone slid the word back across the table like a mirror, challenging his framing without raising its pitch. The murmuring behind the dais started, a whisper chain of aides reading posture like prophecy. Lieu, sensing the crowd's attention leaning, pressed onward. "Yes. I mean, with all these issues so complex, one must be sure we have the appropriate level of expertise at the table." The sentence was wrapped in civility, but every syllable drew a line between we and you. What happened next wasn't loud, it was deliberate tempo shift. Crockett turned a page, unfazed. When she looked up, the camera caught the faintest arch of her eyebrow, that quiet defiance which says, "I've had this debate 100 times, you just happen to be today's version." Her response was surgical. "You're right, complexity matters. Which is why preparation is everything." The words floated, deceptively soft. Her emphasis on preparation landed lighter than any accusation could. The subtext was audible even through the static. "It's not experience I lack, perhaps thoroughness you assume you own." The committee murmured louder. A journalist near the back began writing furiously. Liu's voice, still outwardly calm, carried a trace of dissonance now, the faint tremor of someone realizing the rhythm no longer belongs to them. "Then perhaps," he began, papers rustling as if to assert relevance, "you'd walk us through your legal foundation on." But Crockett interjected, not by cutting him off, but by finishing his sentence for him. Her cadence matched his precisely, as if reflecting him through a more refined version of his own authority. The subtle smile that followed was not triumph, it was release. The audience felt it before he did, the power transfer hidden inside restraint.
He cleared his throat.
"I wasn't finished." "Neither was I," she replied, tone still wrapped in calm. The gavel struck again, 2 measured taps. It didn't matter, the exchange had already burst beyond control. The tension now had a heartbeat. Inside that room, hierarchy began to feel porous. Crockett continued, each word deliberate, not an argument, a revelation. "I understand the need for accountability. I've practiced it daily, in courts, in communities, in this very seat. What I don't practice is defensiveness about credentials I've already proven." She delivered it like a statement of record, final and irrefutable, eyes never leaving his. Lieu held her gaze, expression tightening around practiced neutrality. Every instinct told him to reclaim tempo, but every tool of control, interruption, redirection, authority, had lost its hold. The cameras zoomed slightly closer, sensing climax. You could almost hear the moment crystallize into future clips that would circulate long after the microphones cooled. Crockett placed her pen down, movement slow enough to draw focus. She folded her hands. The gesture said enough, your move. That simple posture contained an entire lifetime of proving, enduring, and still arriving steady. Lieu inhaled as though the air itself contested him. He leaned toward the mic once more, voice measured but slightly brittle. "Well then, Representative, perhaps you care to elaborate." Her response began precisely at his midpoint, not to interrupt but to claim rhythm, gladly. The single word silenced even the background whispers. It was calm, undeniable, centering. The mood had flipped, the pacing belonged entirely to her now. Around them, the lights seemed brighter, the silence heavier. Every person in that chamber, supporters, critics, staff, cameras, recognized it in real time. Control, once seamless, now quivered visibly, and the lawmaker who had perfected composure stood looking across at someone who embodied it better. The next sentence would flip authority upside down. For one elongated heartbeat, the room belonged to silence. Not absence of sound, silence as substance, filling every pocket of air. Jasmine Crockett could feel that silence weigh against her, test her, then tilt toward her in anticipation. Her eyes didn't move. Her lips remained parted, but no words yet. Instead, she let him sit in the stillness he thought he controlled. And for the first time since the hearing began, Lieu looked uncertain whether to continue. The faint shuffling of papers, the hum from fluorescent lights, ordinary sounds suddenly amplified, as if the entire room strained toward the same question: what will she say? The answer began as softly as a breath. "Congressman," she said, tone even, almost kind. "You asked about my credentials." Snapped to a closer frame, the flicker of confusion across his face. She continued, unhurried but unyielding.
"They're not hidden.
"They're all public record.
Law degree.
Years in practice.
Courtrooms served."
But that's not what you're asking, is it? You're asking whether I belong here. Whether I earned the right to sit across from you." Gasps in the background were subtle but unmistakable. The line between civility and confrontation had just turned luminous. Jasmine leaned forward an inch, hands clasped gently. Her voice never rose, yet its clarity cut the room into absolute attention. "When I was defending clients who couldn't afford power," she went on, "no one in those courtrooms asked me how many committees I'd been on. They asked me to stand up for them when they couldn't speak.
And I did."
That's experience. Another snap in the rhythm. Camera flicks to Lieu, jaw tightening, brow arching. He starts to adjust his mic, a reflexive motion of someone reaching for steadiness. "I didn't come here through shortcuts," she said, eyes unwavering. "I came here through casework, through constituents, through late nights studying the bills you now hand me across this table. I came here through failings, too, the ones you survive instead of erase. That's a credential you can't type on a resume." The murmuring around them grew, not rowdy but reverent. One aide's hands hovered above a mobile screen, waiting to timestamp whatever was happening. You could almost feel the hashtag forming somewhere in the digital ether. Liu's voice slipped in, an attempt to ground the dialogue. "Representative Crockett, this isn't personal, I was simply..." She shook her head slightly, enough to reclaim rhythm.
"I know. It never is."
That's how dismissal always hides, inside politeness. A gavel struck once, as though to remind everyone where they were. The sound rang and dissolved. When order resumed, it was her order. "Credentials," she repeated, quieter now, her tone folding into something almost reflective. "Do you know what they meant where I'm from? It meant showing up even when people stopped believing the system works. It meant translating legal code into human reassurance. It meant proving every day that representation isn't a gift, it's labor." She leaned back, and the camera caught the faint fluorescence halos behind her, framing her like a portrait painted for this exact instant. Every syllable landed evenly, but each sounded larger than the last. The logic, the precision, it wasn't rebuttal, it was revelation. "Every hearing I've ever sat in, I've been told to mind my tone," she said softly. "Funny thing about tone, it's only loud when someone finally hears words they can't ignore." In the back rows, two staffers exchanged glances that said, "This is already viral." A journalist mouthed something to a colleague. She flipped it. Lieu tried to smile, reflexively reaching for charm. "Well, I can certainly respect your energy, Representative, but you'll understand, these questions are standard." Jasmine nodded graciously. "Standard, yes. But standards are lived differently depending on who's holding the microphone. The same question can be vetting when asked one way and undermining when asked another. The difference is tone. And tone tells the truth of intention." There it was, the scalpel's edge, wrapped in serenity. The logic dismantled his questions so cleanly that responding would only deepen the bruise.
Then she pivoted.
"You see, Congressman, expertise isn't always measured in years or titles. Sometimes it's measured in stakes. The people I represent don't have decades to wait for someone else to fix what's broken. Their deadlines are measured in rent due dates and medical bills. So yes, I'm credentialed, in urgency." Every word was food for algorithms, sustenance for a movement. In editing bays after the hearing, producers would isolate this quote and replay it, slow-motion captions syncing with low percussion tones underneath it. In real time, the audience in the chamber witnessed speech turn into signal. She paused, breathing steadily, allowing emptiness to frame her next line. "I didn't come here to impress this room. I came here because this room needed reminding of who isn't sitting at these tables yet. For several seconds, no one breathed too loudly. Lieu looked at his notes, realized they no longer served him, and folded them quietly. Still, he tried one last effort at regaining ground. His voice gentled, threading diplomacy through resignation. Your conviction is admirable, Representative Crockett.
I meant no offense.
Her reply returned like a measured chord resolving tension. I know you didn't mean offense, Congressman. But impact has its own intent. That was the final incision. Nothing louder than a whisper, yet it reverberated through wooden desks and fiber optic cables alike. Every witness in the room had felt it, the exact moment when intellect outmuscled presumption. Narration folds in, cinematic in texture. In that instant, the power dynamic in the room inverted completely. Lieu sat back, yielding a small nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that composure itself can win an argument. And yet Jasmine didn't savor it. She simply gathered her papers, as if the exchange were a routine day's work. Her calm now carried a different gravity, the calm earned only after a storm of history. The camera panned slowly, faces in disbelief, admiration, introspection. One member smiled faintly, recognizing poise when they saw it. Another whispered to a colleague, she just taught a masterclass in accountability. Somewhere beyond the room, phones buzzed. Clips already leaked, headlines brewing. Young lawmaker turns interrogation into inspiration. In stairwells and group chats, staffers replayed the instant she turned a question into a mirror. Meanwhile, she returned to silence, comfortable, deliberate silence.
No es mirk, no gloat.
She looked forward, as if listening to the echo that only she could hear. Inside that silence lay the unspoken thesis of her entire career. Composure is power disguised as patience. In that still frame, she became not just the protagonist of the hearing, but its gravitational center. Lieu adjusted his tie, not a sign of defeat, but of recalibration. The hierarchy had shifted, and both knew it. The gavel came down again, softer now, almost ceremonial. Thank you, Representative Crockett, the chair said, voice unusually attentive. She nodded once, the tiniest acknowledgement of closure, though everyone sensed something larger beginning. The hum of conversation resumed, cautious at first, then rising as people realized they had witnessed an historic subtlety, the kind of quiet defiance that redefines decorum for good. As she gathered her notes, a faint reflection caught on the surface of the desk, light meeting movement, dignity carved into image. But outside those walls, the echo would grow louder still. The hearing adjourned, but the story hadn't finished, it had only begun its second life. Within minutes, someone clipped the exchange, 15 seconds of poise and punctuation, and uploaded it to social media with a caption that read simply, "When calm becomes courage." The views spiked as if pushed by invisible wind. Within the hour, timelines shimmered with her name. Hashtags multiplied, each one a digital echo of the room's stunned silence. Hashtag CrockettCalm, hashtag Credentials Matter, hashtag Silence Speaks. By midday, the short clip had migrated across every screen imaginable. Edits added subdued music, slow zoom-ins on her steady expression, freeze frames of the moment Lieu shifted in his seat. Memes emerged almost instantly, side-by-side images labeling her expression piece that passes the clapback. The comment sections read like live forums of vindication. She didn't raise her voice once and still dismantled him, wrote one admirer. That's how you redefine power, said another. Then came the think pieces, morning talk shows dissecting tone and timing, the rolling news banners heralding it as the viral hearing of the season. Pundits praised her ability to remain unshakably professional under pressure. Even the cynics wore tones of respect. Drama analysts called it a textbook reversal of power optics. The language varied, but the consensus was clear. What viewers had witnessed was more than a political moment, it was choreography of dignity. Cultural commentators found poetry in it. They replayed the frame where she paused before responding, holding it up as emblem of a generation's exhaustion turned elegance. Her silence became shorthand for every time marginalized voices refused bait, every moment composure won over chaos. One outlet described it as the pause that traveled faster than sound. But virality isn't reverence alone, it breeds counterreaction. Predictably, a few columnists bristled at the applause, insisting the exchange was overblown, routine committee discourse reframed by online fervor. Professional disagreement misinterpreted as high drama, one post read. Yet those critiques felt thin, like commentary written in a different century's language. The public had already decided that the story's meaning transcended its technical setting. Community groups picked it up, threading the clip into montages celebrating female leadership and immigrant resilience. Young activists edited voiceovers, newscast snippets blending with her line, "Impact has its own intent." The audio circulated separately on reels and short videos, detached from visuals yet instantly recognizable, an anthem for measured confidence. Meanwhile, on cable news, panel hosts sparred over whether her restraint signaled professionalism or challenge. One pundit described the face she made at the end as the most eloquent silence in recent memory. Another guest, smiling into the camera, said, "Sometimes the loudest mic drop happens when you don't even touch the mic." Across the country, viewers replayed those seconds for reasons more personal than politics. Teachers used it as an example of grace under scrutiny. Community organizers cited it in workshops about messaging. Parents showed daughters how dignity can look like defiance without ever raising decibel levels. Even late-night hosts joined the chorus, delivering gentle monologues about how the hearing turned into a masterclass in being unbothered. The laughter was supportive, not mocking, comic relief carrying genuine admiration. Somewhere, social media analysts compiled growth charts, amazed at the velocity of this unlikely cultural storm: overnight follower surges, millions of engagements, international coverage. Through it all, Crockett herself remained almost offline, issuing a brief statement thanking constituents and reaffirming focus on work ahead. The brevity deepened respect, restraint once again became message. And while networks tried to book her for exclusive interviews, her silence served as follow-up, an implicit reminder that validation need not always be voiced. Lieu, meanwhile, maintained quiet professionalism. In some comment threads, viewers revisited his record, acknowledging his usual skill at debate, wondering whether this moment simply exposed vulnerability rather than malice. The conversation, instead of vilifying, evolved. It turned reflective, exploring how authority behaves when faced with composure it can't classify. By the third day, OPDS were calling the event a case study in power dynamics. Strategists noted the changing tone of civic audiences, less drawn to shouting, more to precision. Hashtag shifted again, this time broader. Hashtag earned presence, hashtag modern authority. Students quoted her in essays on representation, editorial cartoons replaced gavel bangs with quiet eyes. The clip had exceeded headline status. It had entered the culture's archive of moments that defined ethos more than politics. People weren't sharing it to champion one side, but to see themselves through posture and poise. It reminded them that sometimes victory arrives cloaked in restraint. And as weekend coverage faded into retrospectives, one truth lingered: what lifted the moment wasn't conflict, but clarity. The nation didn't rally behind volume, it rallied behind the rare calm that demands respect instead of begging for it. In offices, classrooms, community centers, her pause became metaphor, a collective deep breath before speaking truth to power. The country had seen hundreds of debates. Few resonated like this, because this one transformed formality into moral art. And amid the noise, one question remained: what does silence mean when it's chosen, not forced? In the quiet after the uproar, clarity settled like dust in sunlight. The clip had burned through news cycles and comment chains, but its power wasn't in the virality. It was in the lesson quietly woven through its center: that calm is not the absence of strength, but the evidence of it. The hearing's raw energy had distilled into something timeless. Viewers had arrived for drama but stayed for demonstration. Watching Jasmine Crockett hold her ground reminded people that true authority doesn't need escalation, it needs conviction. Volume had lost to vision, and in that exchange lay a universal truth: sometimes the person who pauses longest speaks loudest. Across living rooms, classrooms, office break rooms, the takeaway grew simple and urgent. Titles can open doors, but integrity keeps them from closing again. Society too often mistakes confidence for competence and humility for weakness. This moment rearranged those assumptions. It showed that credentials mean little if they aren't tempered by empathy, and that decorum, when rooted in dignity, transcends politics. Narration softens, adopting a reflective register. This is what democracy's best moments sound like: not applause but consideration. The kind of thinking that stretches beyond sides and slogans. In the mirror of her restraint, people glimpsed their own better selves: the teacher correcting unfairness without shouting, the employee standing firm under pressure, the parent explaining patience as power. The example scaled upward and inward at once, proof that principle begins privately before it appears publicly. Maybe that's what struck such a deep chord, that a single refusal to be rattled could remind a restless public of how resilience actually looks. Not grand gestures or slogans, but steady poise under scrutiny. In a nation exhausted by outrage, her calm arrived like oxygen. It invited an older idea back into the room: that democracy isn't just about who wields the microphone, but about who listens while it's in use. Composure, in that sense, becomes civic duty. It's the discipline to honor disagreement without denying dignity. And for anyone who has ever been underestimated, patronized, or politely dismissed, that hearing offered quiet vindication. For immigrants, for women, for first-generation professionals who've been asked to prove what their presence already proves. Her answer felt like collective exhale. She didn't just defend herself, she defended the idea that belonging needs no permission slip. As the narration rolls forward, imagery glows with purpose. Streets at dawn, people walking into work with renewed posture, students lifting chins before presentations. The ripple of composure has entered daily life, subtle but steady. It's there whenever someone decides not to retaliate in the face of provocation, trusting that truth will hold without shouting. Because silence, when chosen, isn't surrender. It's mastery, the firm conviction that one's worth no longer depends on audience approval. The quiet moment at that hearing became a manifesto for everyone who's ever been talked over yet refused to fade. It told them, you can command a room without raising your voice, you can correct insult with insight. And that ethos, that patient courage, reaches further than the committee table. It threads through the broader story of America itself, a country built on argument, sustained by listening, forever learning how to let reason outshine rancor. Each generation rediscovers that justice whispers before it roars. So when future observers recall this confrontation, they might see beyond its politics. They'll see two figures embodying a national parable, one testing authority, the other redefining it. The exchange wasn't about humiliation or victory. It was about evolution, proof that progress sounds like patience layered with truth. As the music of reflection swells, the narration draws to moral cadence. True strength humbles itself before clarity. True leadership holds fire without losing heat. True credentials live in consequence, not caption. For a watching nation hungry for examples that heal instead of divide, Jasmine Crockett's composure offered a blueprint. It taught that silence can be power's loudest language, more persuasive than arguments, more enduring than applause. And somewhere beyond the feeds and headlines, that silence continues its work, echoing through classrooms, conversations, and quiet acts of courage. Because moments like this don't just end, they echo. From the first question to the final silence, this story carried a rhythm as old as power itself and as new as courage reborn. Ted Lieu's confidence met Jasmine Crockett's composure, doubt met preparation, persistence met its quiet reflection. What began as confrontation ended as vindication, a reminder that real strength doesn't thunder, it resonates. The arc you've just witnessed isn't confined to a hearing room. It's the same struggle lived daily by teachers, advocates, parents, creators, anyone asked to prove value to those already presumed credible. Jasmine's moment gave that struggle language. She didn't lecture, she demonstrated. She showed that respect can be fierce, that boundaries can be defended without bitterness, and that calm clarity remains the most radical statement in a noisy world. If this story moved you, let it move through you. Carry its rhythm into your own conversations. Where disagreement tempts anger, choose precision. Where arrogance crowds the space, hold still and let truth speak at its own volume. That's how dignity amplifies itself, from one composed voice to another, until communities start echoing that strength back. Here on this channel, we gather not for outrage but for illumination. Each story, each debate, each retelling is part of a larger movement, a commitment to reason, integrity, and fearless honesty. If that's the energy you believe in, stay with us, subscribe, share, and stand inside the growing circle that insists on clarity over clamor. Because somewhere beyond the noise, justice still speaks softly, waiting for the rest of us to listen. Remember this cadence, remember this calm, and keep choosing it. Silence arrogance, amplify dignity.